What is going on, football fans? Back at it with another New York Giants video. And in this video, I'm going to talk about the state of the New York Giants as they're off to a 0-3 start. Something we're all too familiar with. I know there's news around the league with the Giants, and I'll probably have a video up today or tomorrow. Maybe even go live and talk to you guys about some of the solutions. But obviously, the Blake Martinez injury, my heart goes out to him. Maybe talk about some of the things that we could do there at the linebacker position, but he will be done for the year with the ACL tear. I was going to go live to do this, but I said to myself, I'd rather just do it in a video format where I'm not really interrupted and I could really get all my thoughts out, because I have a lot to say about the New York Giants right now and why we are where we are, and what is the direction of this football team and some of the options they may have if this season continues to go down the path that it looks like it may be going down. If you watch my channel, I always try to be as optimistic as I possibly can. That's just my personality. Some people are going to disagree with it. Some people are going to agree with it. I try to be a glass half full type of guy. That's just me. And I look for the good things in a team, especially in a situation in which the New York Giants have been in a rebuild, to try to gravitate towards some things that could give me hope as a fan that this team could be starting to turn the corner. I've since lost that hope this year. And I hate to say that. I hate to say that I think the New York Giants, this regime has failed. But that's the way it looks. And I hope I'm completely wrong and they go on and win the next 14 games. But if I'm being honest with you, and yes, I know some optimists will look at the last 2 games and they'll say, well, a couple of things went our way. But you could say that every single year. It's been the same story with the New York Giants. The bottom line is, good teams find a way to win. Good teams find a way for those couple of things to go their way to win football games. The New York Giants have not been able to do that now since 2016 when they went to the playoffs. They always find ways to lose football games in, a lot of the times, the most heartbreaking fashion. And our head coach, Joe Judge, who gave us a lot of hope, or at least some of us a lot of hope, off of last year, we thought he brought structure and discipline and everything else. So far this year has been a complete disaster. But I really want to go over why I think the New York Giants are here and who really is the most to blame. And you could point fingers at so many different people. I've been a guy that has expressed patience, that has tried to give this rebuild a real fair opportunity. Dave Gettleman has completely failed. I want to start off by saying that before I go back into the past, so people don't think that I'm passing the blame away from him and turning towards Jerry Reese. But I want to talk about why Gettleman was even hired, the situation that he was put in, and then what he did to make the situation probably even worse than it was. And we'll talk about, maybe you could at least argue that it's not as bad of a situation that he inherited because of the draft capital that we will be presented with next year. But we're in a really bad situation right now, at least in my opinion, as an organization. And I'm going to start all the way back at 2015, and that's what I always say. I think that is where this mess really was created. And you could definitely argue, obviously, poor drafting before that, 2013, 2014, 2012. But 2015, in my opinion, is where our owner had a real opportunity to set this rebuild where it should have been headed. We should have had a complete reset after 2015. Tom Coughlin was the head coach with the New York Giants since 2004 on. He clearly had a ton of success with this organization. And the New York Giants deciding to move on from Tom Coughlin and not firing Jerry Reese put the team on 2 different timelines, and you never want to do that. Jerry Reese then went out there and spent a ton of money, which gave us 1 year of success and set this organization up for failure for the following years once they started getting injuries and the team completely fell apart. And then we hired Ben McAdoo, and that was just a complete and utter failure. Then the New York Giants decided, or at least we assumed, decided to set the restart button when they brought in a brand new general manager and they brought in a brand new head coach. The problem was, as the New York Giants have admitted to, in 2019, they tried to do 2 things at once. They tried to win and rebuild at the same time. And that cannot happen. You cannot do that. To properly rebuild a football team, you have got to start from scratch and build your team up the way that you want to do it. And as a New York Giants fan, that is what I fear where we may be headed at the end of this year. But we'll see. We'll talk about the options as the video goes along. In 2018, the New York Giants drafted a running back in Saquon Barkley. And I absolutely love Saquon Barkley. He's my favorite player on this football team. But the New York Giants were in no business. They had no business selecting a running back with that pick. Obviously, hindsight 2020. Many scouts said he was the best player in the draft. And, as a Giants fan, a lot of us, myself included, were excited when they took him. I would have preferred to trade down. I'm not the general manager. I think Saquon Barkley still could be a very good football player in the NFL. But when you're a team like the New York Giants and you have nothing to support that running back and you try to fix everything in one offseason, more than likely, it is not going to work. And that is what the New York Giants tried to do. They completely overhauled the offensive line. They spent a boatload on Solder. They drafted Will Hernandez early in the second round, and they thought they could fix the offensive line in one offseason, and they could get Barkley and Beckham together, and it revitalize Eli Manning's career. If you were going to revitalize Eli Manning's career, you should have been fixing that offensive line long before that. Now, Reese definitely tried to select offensive linemen. It just didn't work out. Maybe some of that had to do with the coaching, and maybe some of that had to do with the scouting department. Regardless, we were not in a place to try to win at that point in time. It would have been better to give Eli Manning, if he wanted to continue to play, an opportunity to go to a team, say like the New Orleans Saints. Not that it would have been the Saints, but you look at Drew Brees. Brees had a chance to prolong his career due in large part to the fact that they built the team properly. We could have given Eli Manning that chance as an organization, and we should have, for the second time, started the rebuild in 2018. We didn't. Much like in 2016, we didn't. That now brings us to 2019, in which the New York Giants selected Daniel Jones 6th overall. Daniel Jones is a player I've come around to and a guy that I really have tried to give a fair opportunity to because much like Eli Manning, who I felt was not given much of an opportunity his last 7 years of his career, I think the same for Daniel Jones, which is so disheartening as a New York Giant fan because the New York Giants have set both their quarterbacks up for complete failure. Now, was I happy with the Daniel Jones pick on draft night? No. I thought it was a reach by the New York Giants, and in the moment, I thought he would have been available at 17. It turns out, by a lot of reports, they probably would have had to trade up to get him. We could talk about that till the cows come home. I'm not going to fault the New York Giants for feeling that he was the best quarterback available that fit what they were trying to do and wanted to reset the franchise. Maybe it'll end up being a bad decision. Maybe it won't. But for sure, what they did to Daniel Jones was they set him up for failure. And here's my biggest issue with the pick. Pat Shurmur, who was our head coach at the time, is a quarterback guru. That is the only reason why Pat Shurmur had got the head coaching job with the New York Giants, if we're being honest with ourselves. He was a guy, if you go back and look at it, Nick Foles had a career year under him. Case Keenum had a career year under him. Sam Bradford had a career year under him. He was a guy that got a lot out of guys that were thought to be mediocre quarterbacks throughout their career and really made them shine. The Vikings went to I think it was the NFC title game with Case Keenum at quarterback the year before, in which he put up Pro Bowl numbers. So they brought in a quarterback guru to try to mold the next young quarterback. I think that had to be the plan for the New York Giants when they hired Pat Shurmur. And then they allowed Pat Shurmur to hand select, because he definitely had a lot of say on that pick, his quarterback that he felt best fit his scheme. And then fired Shurmur at the end of the year. Why they fired him, completely understandable. You hear that DeAndre Baker doesn't know the playbook. The team's not winning football games, even though, if we're being honest, the team didn't have a whole lot of talent. And quite frankly, Pat Shurmur was not head coach material. He was not. I'm not trying to say that Pat Shurmur was a good head coach, but if you knew that there was a good chance that you were going to fire Pat Shurmur at the end of the year if the team won 5 games when you were starting a rookie quarterback from week 3 on. You know, you look at Justin Herbert last year, arguably one of the top 5-6 quarterbacks in the sport right now. He won 6 games in his rookie year. So if you knew that you were going to fire him if the team won 5 games and make him to be the punching bag, why in the world would you allow Pat Shurmur to select a quarterback, a guy that you want to be your next Eli Manning for the next 15 years, and put your quarterback in a horrible situation in his second year? So to me, that was another atrocious mistake by this regime, whether that be Gettleman, whether that be Mara, whether it be all three. But it was an atrocious decision to do that, and much like Saquon Barkley, setting him up for failure with a poor offensive line, you did the same thing for Daniel Jones. You forced him to learn a new scheme in his second year. The offensive line still was not fixed. 2020 is the only high pick that I completely agree with from a New York Giants fan's perspective, in my opinion. Andrew Thomas is proving more and more to be worthy of that 4th overall selection. So far this year, I think he's the highest graded tackle among the 4, and he's only getting better. He still has not surrendered a sack this year, and when you think about all the factors, because the New York Giants' inability to fix the rest of the offensive line that he's had to deal with, Andrew Thomas has done a damn good job for the New York Giants so far this year, and is the only guy, at least in my opinion right now, that I could pretty much conclusively say I know will be a cornerstone piece for this New York Giants football team going forward. Some people point to Azeez Ojulari. He's got 3 sacks at 3 games. Let's see him continue to build off of that, and he could very well be a great football player for the New York Giants. Looks promising so far, but to me, Andrew Thomas, I'm pretty sure will be a cornerstone piece for this team at a very important position of need, the left tackle. I could argue probably the second most important position on a football team. So that was a good pick by Dave Gettleman, at least in my opinion. My issue this year is much like 2018. Dave Gettleman and the New York Giants tried to do 2 things at the same time. And it does not work that way. You cannot do that. The New York Giants in free agency spent a boatload of money by bringing in Kenny Golladay, by bringing in Adoree Jackson, which at the time, I'll be the first to say, I was excited. I saw that last year. I thought the New York Giants' biggest need on defense was cornerback, and we all agreed that the New York Giants' biggest need was wide receiver. We could talk about individual moves, and maybe they shouldn't have signed Logan Ryan. Maybe they should have put that money towards Dalvin Tomlinson. Maybe they should have kept Kevin Zeitler. But in terms of being aggressive, I understood it. Reason being, you were rebuilding for 2 years. The team showed hope and promise, even though we may have misjudged the team and thought higher of them than we should have. But they showed hope and promise the previous year that they were starting to build. And you had Daniel Jones on his third year. You needed to start to help your quarterback out. I mean, for God's sakes, he had no help the previous season. So I understood the aggression being that you knew you were coming up at the end of the rookie salary for your quarterback. Where Dave Gettleman and the New York Giants, in terms of their overall plan, like I said, I could point to individual moves that I may not have loved, but in terms of their overall philosophy this year, where they lost me was when they tried to do two things at once. They tried to help the future and significantly improve the present at the same time. To me, if you're going to spend the way in which the New York Giants did in free agency, you go on in the draft and you try to get the best immediate impact player in the first round of this year's draft. And as a fan, a long-suffering fan of the New York Giants, if I can see it, and I think most Giant fans can see it, I don't understand how Dave Gettleman and Joe Judge, who, by the way, is just as responsible for these moves, all you ever hear from the fan base is how they work collaboratively, could oversee the fact that this team needed to address the offensive line at some point in this draft, and in my opinion, as early as possible. And when you had Rashawn Slater staring you in the face and you were as aggressive as you were in free agency, to me, you got to continue with that plan and try to improve this team as best as possible this year. Now, could that trade work out in the long term? Absolutely. Chicago Bears might end up with a 7th overall pick, but at that point, if this offensive line falls apart, which hopefully it doesn't, I'm praying it doesn't. We've had injuries, though. It's been bad luck. And people, to me, look at the offensive line and, in my opinion, are overrating it a bit because it's not as bad as they thought it could have been, but it still hasn't been good. Daniel Jones, I think, has been sacked 9 times in the first 3 games. We can't open up any running lanes. So the offensive line hasn't been good. And if it fails, well, that means more than likely That means more than likely your quarterback probably failed, right? If the offensive line fails Daniel Jones is probably going to fail. So to have that opportunity to take Rashawn Slater there, fill that hole, and to pass up on it, in my opinion, was a crucial mistake by Dave Gettleman and the New York Giants. And for a guy that came in here and expressed the hog mollies time and time again on year 4 to only have one clear solution on your offensive line, albeit the most important position at the left tackle, he hasn't done it. He hasn't even gotten close. You could even argue maybe the offensive line's regressed. Matt Parrott, who's a guy that a lot of people were trying to buy into, a guy with upside, can't even beat out Nate Solder on the right side. 3 games into the season, we had to scramble to pick up 3 offensive linemen before the year started, and I wanted to wait until at least week 5 or week 6 to give this team a true and fair opportunity. But when I'm looking at this schedule and I'm looking at some of the injuries this team has had, I can't help but think that this team is in for another long season. And as a fan base, we don't deserve it. It sucks as a New York Giants fan. I don't want to sound like I'm complaining because I know there's a lot of fan bases that have gone through this. The Jets, time and time again. The Jaguars. But I don't care. As a fan base, we do not deserve this. And this has been completely mismanaged from the start, going all the way back to 2015, trying to win and rebuild at the same time. What is my answer to all of this? Well, I can't give a complete answer on all of it until I see the conclusion of the season, and maybe the team does miraculously rebound when you look at the rest of our schedule. But if you're being honest with yourselves, you look at the next 6 games. What game, maybe you win 1. It's the NFL, you can win games, but can you see us winning, say, 3 out of the next 6 after an 0-3 starts? That is what it would take to even have an opportunity at the back end of the schedule to make the playoffs. You're looking at the Bucs, you're looking at the Chiefs, you're looking at the Rams, arguably the 3 best teams in football over our next 6 games. You're looking at Dallas, who's looked much better than we have. You're looking at New Orleans, who's looked damn good. They just blew out the New England Patriots. Even the Raiders right now are 3-0. We play them. That was perceived to be a more winnable game at the beginning of the year. So when you look at this remaining schedule for the New York Giants, it's hard to really find more than maybe 6 wins right now at the state of this franchise. Maybe 7 if everything broke right, because maybe they can win 3 or 4 divisional games. I'm not saying they will. I'm not even predicting that at this point. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news. I hate to tell you guys that there's very little hope. But right now, I'm clinging on to a thread with this football team the way they've looked over the first 3 weeks, and you factor in the Blake Martinez injury, and you factor in the teams we've lost against. When the season started, to me, I looked at the Atlanta Falcons and I said, oh, that's a game we should win. We're at home. Oh, the Washington football team has their backup quarterback. That's a game we could win. Washington's looked horrible. We couldn't beat them. Denver blew us out, and Denver's a good team. I'm not trying to shortchange them. But the New York Giants right now are a complete mess. And what's the way out of it? Well, there's two ways. The New York Giants could do what they did in 2019 and go half and half, which I thought was a mistake. In 2019, the New York Giants had two options. You either keep both or you get rid of both. I was completely fine with keeping Pat Shurmur for another year just for the simple reason that Daniel Jones was drafted to fit in his scheme. And it would have been a much easier transition. Obviously, you needed to fire Betcher. That could have been the pound of flesh. But, of course, I'm not going to be against firing Pat Shurmur. The team had a lot of issues. He was not a great head coach. But if you did that to me, you had to start completely over. The New York Giants at the end of the year are going to have two options. One is because Gettleman, I think, is going to be fired no matter what, if they're going down the path that I think they're going. One is going to be to basically be status quo. Because if you hire Kevin Abrams or somebody from within the field office, I know they picked up the guy from the Lions. I think his name's O'Brien. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. But if you hire somebody that is from this existing field office, you're staying status quo. Nothing is changing. These guys were very responsible for the decisions, as was Joe Judge. I want to continue to say that. That's option number one. For the, for the reason of being not flipping a coach as much as we have in the past, the New York Giants, for continuity, bring on a GM from within the organization to give Joe Judge another year to try to figure things out with this football team, because obviously they have fired coach after coach after coach. Joe Judge is their third coach in just 5 seasons. They gave Shurmur 2 years. They gave McAdoo 2 years, and that would be only giving Joe Judge 2 years if you were to move on from him. And then you have to ask yourself as a fan, well, what good head coach is going to run at the opportunity to take the New York Giants job? Yes, I know they have 2 first-round picks. So option number one is staying basically status quo, just having a more politically correct general manager, but hiring somebody from within the staff to keep things status quo and give Joe Judge another year. Option two is to completely blow it up. And if you do that, yeah, you're probably looking at another rebuild. As a matter of fact, you're definitely looking at another rebuild, because if you give the general manager that you bring on the fair opportunity, which is what you have to do, you can't pigeonhole him into doing something. He's going to get rid of a lot of the players on this football team and start to bring in players that he thinks this team should be built, the way they should be built. And as a fan, unfortunately, right now, the way I feel, option B is looking better than option A. And I don't want to have to come on here for the next 2 years and express patience and tell you guys we're rebuilding. But if that is what gets this team down the right path, that is what I want as a New York Giant fan. I want them to figure this out. And I'm not saying I've given up complete hope on Joe Judge or the season, but sometimes drastic changes are needed. And the New York Giants right now have been a complete mess for the last 10 years. And none of it has seemed to work. I think the Giants need to pick a plan and they need to commit to it. They can't be half and half like the way they've been in years past. Half rebuild, half try to win now. Fire one GM, keep one coach. That's not the way it works. You need guys that are on the same page with one another. And if you're going to force Joe Judge on another general manager, if you're looking to bring in somebody from the outside, I don't see how it works. Because a very good general manager candidate is not going to want to be told, say we win 5 games this year, you have to have this head coach who has not gotten the job done. And they're going to look back at the games. They're going to say, well, he mismanaged timeouts. He was all about discipline. The team had a ton of penalties. And what are his results? He's won 11 games in 2 years, over 33 contests, when he has very little credentials. He's a special teams coordinator. So I personally think the way it looks right now is option A is you hire a guy like Kevin Abrams or somebody from within the staff to be the general manager, and you give Joe Judge 1 more year. And if things don't take a significant improvement, you blow it all up. Or option B, you blow it all up right now and you start from scratch. And that might mean a lot of new players on this football team in a completely new direction. I hate to be negative, but sometimes you got to be realistic as a New York Giants fan. And right now, this team has been a complete mess. And we can't keep trying to patch these holes in this sinking ship. Sometimes you got to get a brand new boat. As always, guys, if you liked what you watched, please subscribe. Drop a comment. Maybe give me a little thumbs up. Cheers.